Hello and welcome to another session of our monthly webinars from Actio. And today we're going to be talking from a values-driven approach to an ROI-driven ESG approach. It's a very interesting topic because it's a big trend that we're seeing in the market. The ESG initiatives and KPIs and risks that were very much based on the belief that we should do this because this is the right thing to be done, to something more in the lines of we should do this because it impacts our company, our organization in the bottom line, right? So before we dive in, let me just give you some housekeeping tips here. One is feel free to interact with us. So if you want to interact, you wish to interact, write on the chat here your questions or your comments, and we will be reading the chat and trying to answer your questions as the webinar goes along. But we will also save a few minutes towards the end to address the questions that we weren't able to answer during the webinar. So please interact with us and give us your opinions and ask questions. It's very interesting to answer your questions specifically and not just our chat here, right? Also, towards the end, we're going to post here in the chat a link to a feedback form. It's always important to hear you about the webinar so that we can improve from one webinar to another. So if you have a couple of minutes toward the end, you can fill in the feedback form so that we know where we can improve. And also, we have two communities here of professionals, one community of strategy and performance professionals, and one community for risk management professionals. In these communities, the conversation goes on. So if you want to join the community, you can click on the link that is on the chat now and sign up for the community where you can network, you can see what other peers in different organizations are doing, doing right, what's their challenges. So feel free to join the communities here to keep the conversation going after the webinar, right? And for today's topic, we have Dr. Peter Blokland. He is an expert on ISO 31000 and a consultant, a trainer, a coach, and the author of many books. Welcome, Peter.
Welcome, Guillermo. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Peter, before we dive into the questions that I want to ask you to pick your brain, I want to hear a little bit about our audience. So there's going to be a pop-up on your screen with the question of how would you describe your organization's approach to ESG? If it's primarily value-driven, primarily compliance-oriented, or increasingly ROI and performance-driven, or ESG is not yet well defined in the organization. So this is to get you guys involved and start listening to what you have to say. So some are, well, actually most people are saying it's primarily compliance oriented. Peter, is this your experience when you see organizations in in the market.
Yeah.
We have 66% that saying that it's compliance oriented, neither value-based or ROI oriented.
I suppose that most organizations really do it because they think they have to, from a reputational perspective or otherwise. For instance, in Europe today, it's even so that it's legislation. In Europe, there's now the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, where people have to report their risks on environment, social, and governance to comply with this. So that's a whole transition that is taking place. For small organizations, it's seen as a burden. So people try to comply with it, and only few organizations, I think, are really at the core value driven.
Okay. So this makes me think about the difference between US and Europe, right? Mainly. Europe already has a pretty good regulatory framework that demands compliance, while the US is a lot looser. But if most organizations are doing ESG primarily oriented by compliance, that would mean that in the US, we're not going to see as much going on in ESG, right? Is that something that you...
I think a lot of, let's say, it's like corporate social responsibility, CSR. A lot of people are talking about CSR, or were talking about CSR a while ago. But many organizations it's just window dressing. It's not fully lived. Because otherwise, I think the question from a values-driven approach to a ROE-driven approach wouldn't be there. Because I think if ESG or CSR is really value-driven and people are really convinced by it, it will give its ROE automatically. And I will just give a small example of someone I know personally, and I also coached personally, is transportation company. Let's say 10 years ago, or even in Europe, we have a lot of legislation. That's what people always tell about Europe. The EU is red tape. So we also had the Euro 4 and Euro 5 norm engines for trucks. And as an entrepreneur, it was a family company, and he thought, I need to have this world also for my children. So I will invest in much more expensive trucks with a Euro 5 engine. And his only reason was at that time value driven. And he explained to me, but a few years later, I noticed, so I did the investment beforehand, but Euro 5 engines don't consume as much as Euro 4 engines. So the whole time my fleet was consuming less, so I gained money. And at the time that Euro 5 norm trucks were, let's say, obliged for companies, then I could sell my trucks secondhand at a much higher value than before. So you see that if you really take the right decision, it will cost you money to start with, but in the end, it will bring you money. So, and he said in the end, it was a positive result. So, and I think if people try just to do compliance, they don't live it. They do a lot of effort in making nice reports, but not with the results for the organization, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, that's a good example where doing the right thing generated ROI
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
corporation, right? But sometimes the effect is a global good. Everybody gains from the
Mhm.
results of an
Yeah.
initiative or an ESG effort, but it generates costs locally, like to the corporation, if it's not regulated, right? As we see in the US many times, the lack of regulation, and then the decisions tend to be not do the investment or not have the expense.
Yeah.
How can we balance that? And well, I'm going against the example you did,
Mhm.
not saying that that's not valid. That is valid. And I believe that the initiatives can be and should be impacting the bottom line as well. But how can we balance the global good with the local cost, right?
Well, the global good is also the local good. And if you see it as a cost and you don't see it as an investment, then it's, of course, it's a problem. And you always have the investment always comes before the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see in the world today is that there's a lot of short-term uh, pressure for benefits for shareholders. So people are chasing their tail.
Mm-hmm.
And in a world where everything changes pretty fast, this is a very dangerous situation because by chasing your tail, maybe you can get lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to look at the long term as well. And because in, I'm also a systems thinker, and systems thinking is what is lacking in the world today. Systems thinking is trying to balance the short term with the long term, but there are some laws in systems thinking that will always show up. And one of them is if you take the short term, uh, the wrong decision, it will be benefit at first, but cost afterwards. And
Mm-hmm.
the right decision will often cost you first, but bring benefits afterwards. And let me give an example. If now, for instance, let's go back to the engines, people would stick with the Euro 4 engine, so there is more CO2 expelled, so climate change goes a little bit faster. Of course, it's a very short, let's say, it's just a metaphor, let's say. But so in the beginning, they will have more money, but every day after that, they will have to pay more for gas, for gasoline. And in the end, their trucks won't be worth anything because they are not allowed anymore on the roads. So the gain was in the beginning, but the loss was at the end. But the same if you go to global effects, then of course now the drawbacks are paid by society. But in the end, society is also the organization, and the organization is also the shareholder. So you can have a short-term gain, but in the long term, maybe the organization will suffer from storms, flooding, bushfires, whatever, or people that get burned out, or any other kind of the market that, let's say, the, the the whole society that goes down, and you can't sell your products anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always if you take the right decision, it will cost you in the beginning. If you do the right investment, it will always cost you, but it will bring benefits. And to manage that, I think people need to expand their view on risk, because every management is risk management in my view, because you always manage the future, and the future is uncertain. And risk is defined by ISO 31000 as the effect of uncertainty on objectives.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have an objective, then there are risk sources, and risk sources can be anything. That can be employees, that can be shareholders, that can be events, that can be whatever. And all these risk sources, they come together and influence objectives. So it's a matter of looking at what are the risk sources that can affect our objectives, what are the ones that can bring benefit or can positively affect our objectives, and what are the ones that can negatively affect those objectives. And then you have to manage both sides of risk, and that will help you to balance the long term and the short term, because you're not only looking at the benefits for the shareholders, but also what could be the cost for society.
Perfect. Okay, so you mentioned being a systems thinker, right? And when you're a systems thinker, you can understand the relation between things and the larger outcome and the impact on everybody and so on. But
yeah, that's
in general, I would go on a limb here to say that most people are not systems thinkers.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
most people are not systems thinkers. So how can we approach a board member, a C-level executive, and sell them the ESG need, saying that this will impact your bottom line? Like how can we show them the long-term impact?
Yeah, that's always a huge problem. And when I teach risk management, I have this little video of Warren Buffett, who explains in an interview that he needs to be the chief risk officer of his organization because he has the overview and he is the ultimate responsible one. And I think if CEOs can start taking that approach, I need to be the chief risk officer, then of course they have to start looking at the future, at the risks. And if then they can not only think about the risks that, let's say, are related to the organization itself, and not only if they don't only look at what can go wrong, but also how they can benefit from an uncertain future and how they can shape the future, then of course they get a different perspective. And then of course they can, let's say, if you know that, for instance, if you push hard on employees, that in the end they will burn out or your reputation will go down, then of course they have to take that into account. And then of course it's maybe easier to, let's say, become an ESG compliant, because compliance always follows when you are value driven, you will also be compliant. But it's not the main thing is not being compliant, but you will see the real return on investment then. And so it's looking at the long-term return on investment, the sustainability of the organization. I think that is the responsibility of every, let's say, board member.
Good. So Peter, the traditional value-based model of ESG has faced significant scrutiny, right? We're witnessing a fundamental shift toward ROI-connected model, where ESG initiatives are explicitly linked to business performance and proactive risk mitigation.
Yeah.
What is the current evolution of the global ESG landscape? And then I'll ask you to break it down by region, right? Because we see very different tendencies and trends in different regions of the world, right?
Yeah, I think China probably is the smartest. I think they if you see that China has increased its woodlands, so you know they are at a very high level busy with dealing with climate change. Of course, they have an economy that is transitioning, but you see they highly put emphasis on electrical vehicles. So they are taking a huge advantage in that kind of domains. I think Europe, of course, with the CSRD legislation and ESRS, sustainability reporting standards, European sustainability reporting standards, I think they are more like, let's say, the pushing organizations by trying to have them compliant with their regulation, but let's say pushing them in a certain direction. When I look at let's say the USA, I'm a little bit worried. It seems that money is the only thing that counts, and that short term is the really short term that is important, and what happens afterwards, nobody cares. So that's really worrying. I have less, I think, Africa, South America, I think it depends on what kind of political system is at there, but also there, you know, the global picture is not looking very good. So I think there is a lot of opportunity to change the approach in managing things and having more, let's say, long-term vision for organizations. And those who will be the first to have this more long-term vision will benefit in the end. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very hard to compete with the companies that are really looking at the short-term benefits. So that's a real problem in the world today. That's, I think, not very helpful for our future. That's my view on it. Yeah.
So Europe has compliance rules for within the Europe zone, but the US, as you said, has a very short-term view on results and performance. And the last sentence you said is that competition between companies that are looking for the long term and the extremely short term can be biased toward the short-term results, and that actually impact. So I think that is the problem we're living today, right?
Yeah, I think that's really an issue. Yeah.
As I'm gonna speculate here, but or ask for your speculation actually. As Europe regulated internally, shouldn't the world force a regulation externally as well? Because
but I think that is very hard to do. Yeah. I think what people need to understand is if we want our children to benefit from our world, and I think there is something we need to do. Mm-hmm. I think if we don't want China to conquer the world economically, because they are not that big fighters, they don't want to have war, but they want to buy everything. So if you don't want to be bought by the Chinese in 50 years from now, I think you better start thinking on the long term.
Okay, let's break down ESG into its parts, right? Yeah. And talk about how can each, like what kind of initiative on each of these parts, environmental, social, and governance, can actually impact the bottom line in long and short-term perspectives, right? So let's start with environmental initiatives and directives. Mm-hmm. Which environmental initiatives can actually move the needle on the bottom line?
Yeah. Well, we already had a small environmental example of the trucks. But suppose, water is also becoming more and more a problem. Now, you can imagine that you have an organization that's looking at the short-term benefits, don't make much investments, and in the end, they have a plant and they use water. But water becomes more and more expensive. In the end, maybe water will become very valuable, but maybe unavailable to that company. And you compare it to the organization that looked at this particular environmental aspect and invested in water capture, water reuse, and so on. So they have, in the end, in the beginning, they will pay a lot. But in the end, they will gain a lot because they can reuse their own water for their production, and they will have less consumption. They have to pay less, and if there is a shortage, they probably have their own resources. So that's just an example, and you can find many examples. But the thing is, you need to invest first, and that's the problem when you are competing with organizations that just, let's say, try to take the short-term gain. And I think that's really the switch. If everyone starts thinking in the long-term gain, I think it will be much more beneficial, not only for the organizations, but also for society.
Yeah, I agree. The problem is how, right?
Yeah.
How to get people to bet on the long run when a competitive environment forces them continuously to look at the short term,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Basically, these are our systems at work. And if you want to change a system, you can try to change its behavior. That's very hard.
Mm-hmm.
You can try to change the structure of the system. That's also difficult, but it's feasible. But the only thing that will change a system is the mental models that are behind the system. So as long as people think that the short-term return on investment is what they need, you can't change the system. It will always go to that system. So the thing that you have to make people aware of is that the long term, to have long-term sustainability, you have to let go of the short-term return on investment and aim for the long-term return on investment. And I think that's the only switch that really needs, because the moment you start thinking about the long-term return on investment instead of the short-term return on investment, you will take other decisions and you will become by itself almost a value-driven ESG organization.
You naturally shift to that, right?
Because it's the ideas in the heads of people. So if you have a CEO that thinks that the quarterly results are the most important thing, and that you have a 10% increase in shareholder value every year, then in the end it will probably explode. But if you have someone who says, okay, what is necessary for this organization in 10 years to be excellent and to be really of value for society, that's a completely different idea, but it generates a different system.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about environment. Let's talk about social, right? What are some of the social initiatives and directives that impacts the bottom lines of organizations? You already mentioned the burnout epidemic, right, that we're going through. Give us some examples or even other social impacts that.
Basically, I want to go back to, let's say, the idea of CSR. And you have people, profit, and planet. So let's say E is more being busy with planet. Then you have people. And if you respect people, that means if you pay them the right amount of attention, that means when you value them for what they do, they will give just a little bit more. They will go maybe for the extra mile, and they will do a little bit more for the organization than they are just paid for.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if you don't respect people, if you try to squeeze them out, then of course, maybe they will do their job, but they will not always do it full-heartedly. They probably, at moments when their extra mile is required, they will give up. And that, in the end, makes it different for an organization. Of course, in the beginning, it will not be noticeable. But at a certain moment, maybe people start falling out. So the burden on other people will be higher. So that's a direction you don't want to go as an organization. So that's, I think, the most important thing is that people are basically the most valuable thing in your organization, because without the people you don't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
They must make the profit for you. So you better be careful in how you treat them. So and that's, I think, it's about team. You have to invest in leadership, because people don't learn leadership at school, but it's something you can learn, and I think there is still a lack of leadership education in the world, because leadership is about people, about inspiring people, about showing them a way, having a vision. It will also be, if you develop leadership, it will be easier to see the long-term aspects of the organizations and so on.
There's a whole industry. Since I'm not citing any particular company, but consulting is an industry that is famous for churning out people, right? They get
you mean the big consultancy firms?
The big consulting firms. Of course, you're going to have exceptions in every generalization like this, but in looking at the market, this is what we see: an intentional churn and squeeze to see who stays, who goes out, and who leaves. Just it's a side byproduct, let's say.
So in the event, so if you can't stand the heat, don't stay in the kitchen, and like that kind of thing.
Kind of like that, but mental health issues is abundant in people that leave, and there is no cost to whoever generated that, right? There's also I'm Brazilian, right? So there's a very famous Brazilian company that had that intentional HR policy of putting it in, getting the most out of people, just squeezing, and then once they are, had no more juice to give, just spit out, right? And that is an externality that is not very seen, because you don't measure the the mental health of people that are leaving, or
that's a cost that is put on society. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly like the environmental costs when you
Yeah.
make decisions for the very short term, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
How?
And I think a lot of organizations get away with being not so harmful for society on ESG aspects because for the moment they don't pay the price, the cost. The cost is for society. But in the end, society will suffer as well.
Mhm.
So, of course, for the short-term benefits, it won't make a difference for the shareholders. And that's one of the real problems that we are facing today is that they live in their bulb getting their profits and society gets all the burden. But more and more, society will not accept this anymore.
Mhm.
And the cost will get will return back to the organizations. And then, of course, such an approach is no longer sustainable. So the problem is that the unsustainable approaches today in many countries are still sustainable for the shareholders. They are unsustainable for the workers. They are
Sure.
unsustainable for society. But that's because they only look at it from a very narrow perspective. So from a systems perspective, the system itself is going down. And that's what is happening with the world, of course.
And that's harder to regulate, right? So when we talk about environment, it's easier to regulate and just make organization be compliant.
Yeah.
How can this level of social impact be regulated by governments, organizations?
I think it's on the level of governments that this needs to be done. And of course, in Europe, again, we have different legislation that is helping people to get a better work-life balance.
Mhm.
For instance, in Belgium, the past week, they decided that, for instance, young parents have the right to have 5 extra days of leave to take care of the young borns and things like that. That's just okay. It's just 5 days, but it's a relief for young parents and for young mothers or young fathers. So it's if the father doesn't take the 5 days, the mother can take the 5 days. That's legislation, and companies have to follow that.
Mhm.
So that's just an example that is very fresh from today, from let's say from this week or past week. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you said about like the society not accepting this kind of behavior from organizations, I think it's already happening.
Yeah.
When we see Gen Zs, right,
Mhm.
the younger generation in the workforce,
Yeah.
they will not work for an organization that has this intentional
Yeah.
pressure cooker, culture.
Yeah.
I saw an example, a very, very close example of someone that I know that was offered a new position, uh, but did not accept the new position because he would have to work with, it wasn't like an organization, but one particular person that had this way of working of, just putting on pressure and not caring about the long-term
Yeah.
mental health. And he just refused to work with this person and
No, absolutely.
did not take the promotion.
And I think once in a while you hear the war on talent, and I think, of course, the world needs talented people, and organizations need talented people. And certainly with the pressure that is now, and the possibilities that people have to change from one organization to another, it will be the organization that is the lighthouse where people want to go to, where they think they have the best options. And of course, those who squeeze people can always start paying more, but then you see that their approach is already costing them more, you see? So, and that is how it will creep slowly. The wrong approach will, in the end, be less and less and less beneficial. But I think in systems, sometimes it's a long process. But what is happening now is changing very quickly, is the environmental aspects are becoming really pressing. It's already, let's say, I'm old enough to see that it's already, let's say, 40, 50 years that people are telling, okay, there's something coming. And today we see that it is really happening.
Okay. And on the third letter of ESG, governance,
Yeah.
I believe that, well, governance is designed to ensure that organizations have long-term sustainability. Right?
Yeah.
That's the foundation of having governance. Is a good governance solution for the two previous topics we talked about, environment and social? Because they should be looking at the long term. That's their job, right?
Yeah, yeah. And as I said before, if you really look at the long term, automatically the E and the S will also become in the picture. And of course, for me, you have the ISO standards. ISO standards are best practices. So for governance, there is ISO 37000, which puts a lot of emphasis on ethical decision making. And I think if you combine ISO 37000 and ISO 31000, you have a really good governance management system that will allow you to put more emphasis on both a value-driven and a return on investment-driven ESG approach, because it will allow you to have the governance to think about all the little details, and also the right strategic input of looking to the long term.
Okay. All right. Before I go to the next question, I would like to ask a new survey here with our audience to understand a little bit of their take on this as well. So there's going to be a new pop-up on your screen. To what extent is ESG integrated with strategic and risk decisions in your organization? So is ESG something separate, or is it connected with strategy and risk management? So you're going to have also 4 options there. And you can select the one that comes closer to your reality. So we got almost a bell curve here. Pretty well distributed between fully integrated to limited integration, right? But mainly integrated in some areas, but still evolving, or managed largely separately from strategy and risk. That's my experience so far, right? I would say that the organizations that I can see from afar would mainly be managed largely separately from strategy and risk, as if it were a different department, as if it were a different process disconnected from strategy and risk. What's your experience on this?
Well, that fits perfectly with the compliance aspect of ESG, because ESG is, you have to comply. So we put someone responsible who has to look at this, and he must tell us what to do so that we comply. So, and that's a separate thing then. So it's not on the board of directors agenda. It's just a tick in the box somewhere. And I think this is also how often risk management sits in organizations. It's also something often because it's necessary. It's driven by compliance. Of course, you see GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. And I think I would probably prefer governance, risk, and performance. That would be much better because performance beats compliance every day. So I think if people could make that shift and see how risk can improve performance, because it's the same thing. If you look at risk, if you look at safety, or you look at performance, we're talking about objectives. And risk is objectives in the future. What will happen with our objectives in the future? That is risk that can be positive, can be negative. Then you have safety. That's in the moment. What will happen with your objectives in the moment? Will your heart stop beating or not? Will you get the ceiling on your head or not? That's basically in the moment. And when the moment has passed, then you can look how things performed. And that's performance, how your objectives have been achieved or not achieved on all different levels. So if you want to perform well, you have to manage your safety and you have to manage your risk. And ESG, of course, is in the domain of risk management. So and it's the sustainability part of risk management. So so if you want to be sustainable in the end, then you have to manage the risks related to environment, social aspects, and your governance.
Okay, I will ask Jerusalem to jump in at this point to show us in practice how these three things can be connected: performance, strategy and performance, risk management, and ESG. Our point of view is that it should be a single management model and
Absolutely.
not fragmented perspectives, right? So, Jerusalem, can you show us just a quick example of how these things could and should be connected? And then we'll come back for one last question, Peter.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Guilherme. So today in the discussion that you focused on how organizations are moving beyond ESG as reporting and compliance, right? And the focus is on creating business values for companies. Right. So what I'll show you is that how we could actually connect the ESG initiatives to business performance, right? And also to risks. So I'm going to start with a traditional strategy, right? So this is a balanced scorecard from, we see that how values are created across the different perspectives, right? In the financial, clients, internal process, and learning and growth, right? From at a glance, I'm able to see where I stand in terms of achieving my objectives, right? Red shows that where there's a huge goal deviation, the yellow shows that we're off track, but by a little bit, and the green shows us where things are going well. So I'm going to deep dive into one of the objectives, right? So relationships. Okay. So I'm able to see the drivers that contribute to this strategic objectives, right? I focus on improving production quality, but it's connected to 3 KPIs, right? And 2 of them, defect rates and production yield, are operational KPIs, but I have one more KPI, which is an ESG, right? So it shows me that in order to achieve my goal of improving production quality, operational excellence is not just enough, but I have to consider the environmental and sustainability factor, right? So waste generated is here. Okay, so if I open this further, I'm going to see that I have the waste generated across multiple plants, right, in Vancouver, Ottawa, and Toronto, right? And then, so the main goal deviation is in a Toronto plant. Okay, so this shows me, if I open here, by period, month-to-month performance, right? And also I know who the responsible person is, Guilherme, and also which departments. Okay, and for each KPIs that we can create an action plan. Show you here. Okay, which shows us what we need to do in order to achieve our KPIs, right? And it's like we have a specific actions, the responsible people, and the expected timelines, right? And it shows me like whether I'm performing according to my timeline or not. Okay, not just that, but I have a project, right? An initiative connected to helping me achieve this KPI, waste generated, and also risk, right? So here, like we're managing all our objectives, KPIs, projects, and risk together, right? Because I see for this waste generated KPI that I have a risk. And if I open this, I see the risk evaluation, right? And the most recent one was very high. So overall, it's in a very critical condition. So this is my risk exposure. Okay, do I have a control set? So okay, I have these 2 controls, and I can see whether I'm reviewing them on time or not, right? And also the status of my mitigation actions. Okay, so I am able to see that my project, my risks, and my KPIs together. Right, so now I'm going to go back to one of the KPIs, like which I saw where's their huge goal deviation, right, waste generated in Toronto plants. So I'm going to create a deviation report here, because the real question is not just that I am off track, but why? I need to answer that. Okay, so, oh, sorry. I'm going to open. What? Oh. Okay, so here is where I could add my facts, right? That shows me why they're the status, right? So this shows me that it's not just a one-time thing, but it's a trend that's been going on, and I can create this stratification here to help me identify where the majority of my deviation concentrates, and also here I can create causes, right? I can do my root cause analysis here. Okay, let me just open the one with a report.
Susan,
all right,
I think it's
so
the first one, but you put some value,
yes,
green value on it, but you can click on it,
okay.
the first one, I guess. Oh, sorry.
It's okay, I guess. So here, I can create my cause analysis here. Okay. So I can use different kind of approach, the Ishikawa, the 5 whys and duty matrix, to help me identify the root causes and eventually create a corrective actions. So this is where I can add them. Sorry, I don't have the examples here created. It changed. But the whole idea is that we can treat our goal deviations in this software, right? So this, now we're talking about the ESG KPI that is connected to my business performance. Okay. So what we saw currently is ESG from a perspective of my business performance, but let me show you a different view on how we can just focus on ESG, right? Let's see it from ESG perspective. So now I'm looking at my ESG report. So I have my KPIs from the environmental, social, and governance perspectives, right? The KPI that I was referring to earlier, I can see it here. So waste generated. Okay. So here also I can get like the same view, look at the relationship, do my analysis. Right. So the whole idea is that we're bringing together the ESG and business performance in one screen and making sure that the methodology for managing ESG and also our business performance is integrated. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'll stop here. Guilherme, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Salam. So Peter, we're actually almost running out of time, but I would like to ask you one last question. That is how to move forward, right? So if you have value, like ESG-driven, value-driven ESG, or a compliance-driven ESG, how do you transition to an ROI-driven ESG? That is, how do you sell internally that systems thinking way of seeing that ESG is not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's the thing that will support or sustain the long term of the company itself, right? How do you sell that internally?
Well, of course, I did a PhD on how organizations can become excellent and sustainable excellent. And I think it's about leadership. Leadership determines what is important for the organization. So if the environment is important to the organization, it becomes an objective. If the social aspects of the organizations are important for leadership, it becomes an objective. If governance is important to the organization, it's an objective. And then it's just managing the effect of uncertainty on objectives, which means managing the risks that are related to those aspects. So in the end, if you implement risk management, but really risk management from a systemic perspective, not just risk assessment, but really risk management. So if you implement the organizational arrangements to conduct and manage an organization with regard to risk, that is, for instance, what ISO 31000 is about. And ISO 31000, for instance, it's very simple. It's basically just common sense in a standard. It exists. It consists of a vocabulary. Why? Because people need to talk the same language. People need to understand each other if they talk about risk. That's the first thing. It's a very important thing. At the same time, this vocabulary also is a set of mental models that will form the system. Second, it has eight very important principles that support the purpose of managing risk. And managing risk is about creating and protecting value. And if you look at value then from a more, let's say, systemic perspective, not only for shareholders, but for stakeholders, then you shift your perspective to the system. That it's just a little bit larger than just the shareholders, but also the organization. So employees, suppliers, customers, society, they all have their stake in it. And if then you have a framework where actually, which is the governance of risk management in your organization, where you determine the responsibilities, where you determine your overarching strategy, where you determine the effort you will make to manage risk, and also to integrate risk management all over your organization at all levels, in all aspects. And then you have a process that is based on communication and consultation, because risk management in the first place is gathering information, disseminating information to make better decisions. And then you, of course, you have an aspect that is a leadership aspect, that is what is important to the organization. You have to put your objectives into criteria. So if you have clear criteria that come from the leadership, it also becomes very much easier for people down the line to make decisions if they have clear criteria. So that is a process they have to go through. And if that is clear what the objectives are, what the criteria, then you can start identifying which risk sources can contribute to creating value, which risk sources are actually trying to diminish that value. And then you can start analyzing how you can deal with those different kinds of risk sources, improve the ones that support creating value, and of course, mitigate those that, let's say, try to destroy value. Then you can evaluate, and then of course, you need to respond to those risks. And the risk response can be, okay, I don't see any problem, so we do nothing. Or we have to do something. We have to treat the risk. We have to take more risk because there is an opportunity that we can pursue and that can create more value to us. Or we have to mitigate risk and try to avoid certain aspects. So, and that is, the next step is then you have to monitor and review what you do all the time. And if you do that every step of the process, and you communicate about it, then you become a learning organization. And that is what that process does. So you have a framework to integrate that process in your organization. You have principles that guide your framework and the use of that process. And you have a vocabulary of everyone, let's say, how to understand each other. And I think that is what can bring people to fully let's say, from a compliance-based ESG to a return on investment-based ESG.
Okay. Very good insights, Dr. Peters. Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. And thank you, the audience, and Jerusalem as well, for participating here with us.
It was my pleasure, and thank you for this opportunity to share my opinions about ESG.
All right. Thank you very much. See you in the next webinar. Bye.
Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.
You too.